Hi, my name is Miranda McGarity, and I'm here to talk about my project, it's a special project on John Fitzgerald Kennedy and his leadership behaviors during his time in office, and before that as well. So John F. Kennedy was our 35th President of the United States. He was the youngest ever elected president. He was not originally supposed to be president. His brother Joe Kennedy was supposed to be president, but unfortunately he passed away during a volunteer assignment during World War I. Afterwards, John F. Kennedy was pushed into the shoes of Joe Kennedy. Now, in this instance, I believe that it would be innate characteristics that they were looking for. The Kennedys themselves were consistently into politics, and they believed that if you were a Kennedy, you had the capability to lead. And so therefore, that was an innate characteristic that they had. Now, during the time of 1960s, which he was elected in 1960, and he started his presidency in 1961. Well, of course, in 1959, man had done the research on what kind of characteristics that were most well looked for at the time. Now, at the time, the desired traits in leadership that he did possess would be intelligence, he had masculinity, he had dominance, and he was an extroverted individual. Now, I believe that intelligence was quite self-explanatory. He was a Harvard graduate. He worked hard. He went into the Navy. He wrote a book. He was an author for Profiles in Courage. That book won a Pulitzer Prize. He also was a representative in the U.S. House of Representatives, as well as a senator for the state of Massachusetts. Now, for masculinity, he was a very masculine man, especially in photos. He held himself well, he groomed himself well, and he married an amazing woman, Jacqueline Kennedy, who is a different subject altogether. Now, this masculinity was portrayed amongst photos in journalism, and he was able to maintain that because he had a great relationship with the journalist at the time. Now, that relationship he had formed because he was actually a very sickly man, and he was often on crutches or in a wheelchair. And so he wanted that dominant and amazing forefront to come through to the public, and so he had to deal with the press to keep his ailments under wraps, and that they would portray him as a dominant masculine dude. Now, he also is incredibly extroverted. He was a charismatic leader. Now, this is the one that I think is most important. I think John F. Kennedy's leadership can be defined under the transformational and outstanding leadership that was a charismatic form of leadership. Now, even in his very first speech, his inaugural address, he asked the people, ask not what your country can do for you, but what you can do for your country. Now, this was a call to action. He was inspiring them by focusing on a vision of the future. What can we do for our country consistently throughout my tenure as president? How can we work this out? And so that charisma carried him through. He was so charismatic that on his inauguration day, he refused to wear a hat because he didn't want to mess with his looks. And so afterwards, the millinery business, as well as the hat business, slowly began to fall off because people were imitating the man who had the charisma to make people want to imitate him and continue on in his legacy. And so he actually ruined the hat business with a single decision during his inaugural address. And all of that was formed of his charisma and the ability that he had. Now, while John F. Kennedy was a great leader, he also made his own mistakes. For example, during the first 3 months of his presidency, he was dealing with Cuba. In specifics, he was dealing with the Bay of Pigs. Now, he was talking to a bunch of CIA guys, he was talking to his aides, he was delegating quite a lot because at this time, he was on antipsychotics, he was on amphetamines, he was in a lot of pain, he'd just done a recent back surgery, and all of that was messing with his ability to think. So instead of taking some time and focusing on it himself, he was content to delegate it. This was something that he should have been in a directive leadership mode. He should have been a part of every single process of forming a group of paramilitary men to invade an entire other country. This could have formed war. Now, at the time he delegated this decision, he was told that America would never be officially involved. And at this point, he said, okay. Well, right away, he realized that that was a terrible decision. Over 100 people died on the beach that day and over 1,000 were imprisoned. So this was a decision where he learned that sometimes delegation is not key. Unfortunately, afterwards, he had a tendency to micromanage, especially in the Cuban Missile Crisis. However, that micromanagement did serve him well later on in his career. Now, other things that he had were he was a big guy about leadership. obviously. This is an analysis of leadership. Now, he was able to make decisions on his own, and I believe he did a lot of management by exception, specifically the aggressive type. Now, this is because he was actively looking for mistakes in what his advisors were saying. He was looking for these mistakes while also making a collaboration of his own ideas and his own opinions on what should be done, specifically during Berlin and the Cold War. Now, at this point, he was advised to wage a small nuclear war on the Soviets. However, he quickly realized that this was something that he would not be able to control the fallout of, and he decided that that was inadvisable at the time. He refused to be a part of beginning another world war. He was a part of World War II. That's where he got his main popularity from. Was he earned the Naval Medal of Honor. He also earned the Purple Heart, and this is all through his heroics and leadership during that war. So after living through that war, losing his brother to that war, he was not going to be a part of starting World War III. Now, instead, what he did was he looked to create a partnership with the city of Berlin. He went to the city and he gave a speech, and he said, "Ich bin ein Berliner." Now, this means, to him, it meant that he was a Berliner. He was a man from Berlin. And this was to show the partnership that he had with the city of Germany, or with the country of Germany. Now, mind you, what he actually said was that he was a jelly donut. However, the people were so impressed with his ability to try and speak the language and his understanding that the allies that we formed from that we still have today. So this was, of course, a different way of leadership making, and he skipped straight over acquaintance and stranger and moved right into the partnership phase. Now, the big one that had everlasting consequences was the space race. Now, he went in, he talked to a special guy in Congress, so they talked to a special unit in Congress, and he talked about how we needed to be a part of the space race. We needed to put a man on the moon before the decade was over. He knew that this was going to be an incredible technological feat. However, he also knew that the US could do it. And he knew that it wasn't only the idea of putting a man on the moon, but it was also going to a defeat that he could push onto the Soviets that wasn't through battle, that was through technological feats. Now, to me, this was a big showing of his cat skills, because he had the conceptual idea of being able to move into a defeat of the Soviets without using battle. So big concepts here. Now, he also had a huge human interest there. He had to convince the Congress, he had to convince the people in general, he had to convince the people working for him that putting a man on the moon was going to be their best option. Now, however, he did not have high technological skills in this business. He didn't know much about putting a man on the moon, but he knew it was possible. So he knew how to delegate to the right people. And I think that that shows his cat skill in leadership. Now, of course, he was never able to see this come about because he was assassinated in 1963. However, we did put a man on the moon by 1969. And I think this is another example of his charismatic leadership, that we wanted to put a man on the moon before 1970, even though he was no longer there to see it. So personally, in conclusion, I know that John F. Kennedy was not a perfect leader, nor was he a perfect man. He had multiple affairs. He was incredibly ill. He didn't tell the public about his disability, about his time on medication. However, he made some wonderful decisions for the people as a whole. He helped us during the Cold War. He was a huge proponent of the space race. He pushed us into the future. He asked Americans what we could do for the country as a whole. He started a new level of patriotism, and he opened up the way for more people to become leaders. He was only 35. He was one of the youngest presidents ever elected. So he was the youngest president ever elected. And on top of that, he was the only Catholic that had been elected at the time. So he opened it up for more unique individuals. He made some terrible decisions as well, for example, the Bay of Pigs. However, I honestly think that his greater decisions weigh out those bad ones. However, all of that is going to always be colored by the idea that we saw him assassinated in 1963. Everything is looked on the idea that he was a martyr for the American public. So everything's going to be colored with rose-colored glasses. So a little bit of rose-colored glasses. John F. Kennedy was an amazing leader. He became a great leader through the influence of his family mainly, and also his popularity during the war. But he used that leadership, and he's used it as a springboard to create actual change in the United States. So that's my presentation of my project. I hope you guys enjoyed it, and have a nice night.